Good evening, everyone. I'm Will Glover, and I'm here with reporter and producer from BridgeDetroit, Bryce Huffman. Bryce, thank you for taking the time to talk to me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on, man. Thanks.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into it. You were out there on election day seeing what's going on. Tell me a little bit about what you saw when it comes to turnout, because we know Detroit and essentially all over the country, there are record numbers both in mail-in ballots and, it gets a little murky when it comes to who was out in the streets, standing in line to actually place their votes.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the unprecedented number we saw in absentee ballots because I actually started my election day at the TCF Center in Detroit, or what used to be Cobo Hall, if you're not familiar with the term. And that's where they had the AV counting board, where were collecting all the absentee ballots and sorting them and counting them. So, based on how many workers were there and how many ballot boxes were there, I would say that the big turnout really was in the absentee ballots. When I went out to different polling places later in the day, I started primarily in Southwest and Northwest, and kind of kept to the west side of the city. But there weren't big lines. There weren't very crowded polling places because that heavy absentee turnout.
So, based on what you saw, how prepared do you think the city was when it came to, receiving people at the polls, even if there was, an influx or more than expected to be there?
I think the poll places were all pretty prepared for what they saw. I didn't see any major issues when I was out. The only real hiccups that I saw were there was a polling place in Southwest that didn't have an Arabic translator on the scene immediately, so people kind of had to wait for that translator to show up. But most of the polling places I went to were ready for what they saw and were able to handle it pretty easily.
Now, one of the things that had a lot of people on edge was that there would be some sort of clash or, upheaval in some way, some sort of unrest when it comes to, protests, counter protests, and things like that. Was that something that you were concerned about when you headed out that morning? What was on your mind? What were you, mentally preparing yourself for?
So on election day, I was kind of preparing that I might see more out of town folks than usual at some polling places to just kind of monitor and be poll challengers and poll watchers. But most of the people that I ended up seeing that were from out of town, actually, I saw the next day, yesterday, after election day. There was a protest at TCF Center outside because a lot of conservative poll watchers weren't being let in. There was some confusion about why they weren't being let in, but the official stance, I guess, from the city is that these people were trying to interfere with their election process. And, when there's people who aren't from your city interfering with your election process, you're not going to let them in. So, despite that, despite some people being very angry and upset, no real violent incidents or clashes happened. Even though there were some incidents where counter protesters showed up, and there was some loud chanting back and forth, but no violence to speak of. There was a heavy police presence there making sure that nothing happened. So I think we might end up seeing more protests, especially from people on the right who are not fans of how the Michigan election turned out. But at the end of the day, those people have their right to protest, and I assume that we're going to see more of that.